The morning sun cast golden rays through the ancient stained glass windows of Westminster Abbey, painting rainbow patterns across the stone floors that had witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies. Outside, thousands of people had gathered since dawn, their voices creating a gentle hum of anticipation that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the historic cathedral. Inside, distinguished guests from around the world sat in careful formation, their formal attire creating a sea of elegant colors against the Abbey's timeless gray stones. Sarah Mitchell, a seasoned royal photographer who had covered royal events for over 2 decades, adjusted her camera settings one final time. She had positioned herself in the perfect spot to capture the moment that millions around the world were waiting for. Her hands, usually steady as rock during such events, trembled slightly today. There was something different about this coronation, something that felt more significant than any royal event she had previously documented. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood at the altar, his ceremonial robes flowing around him like liquid gold. His face showed the weight of the moment he was about to witness and guide. This was not just any ceremony. This was the crowning of a new era, and everyone present could feel the electricity in the air. The ancient abbey seemed to hold its breath, as if even the stones understood the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Lady Margaret Thornbury, a close family friend who had known William since his childhood, sat in the second row, her heart beating faster than usual. She remembered the young boy who used to run through the corridors of royal residences, his laughter echoing off the walls. Now, that same boy was about to become king, and she could hardly believe how quickly time had passed. Her eyes misted slightly as she thought about his mother, Princess Diana, and how proud she would have been to see this day. The royal musicians, dressed in their finest uniforms, held their instruments ready. The conductor, a man who had spent years preparing for this single moment, felt beads of perspiration forming on his forehead despite the cool temperature inside the abbey. He had rehearsed every note, every timing, every breath that would accompany the most important entrance in recent royal history. The silence in the great hall was so complete that even the whisper of fabric against stone seemed amplified. Security personnel, barely visible but ever-present, maintained their vigilant watch from strategic positions throughout the abbey. They had spent months planning every detail, every possible scenario, ensuring that this historic day would proceed without incident. Their training and professionalism were evident in their calm demeanor, but each one understood the enormous responsibility they carried on their shoulders. The invited dignitaries included heads of state, religious leaders, and representatives from Commonwealth nations. Each had traveled great distances to witness this moment, understanding that they were about to become part of history. The French president sat beside the German chancellor, while representatives from Australia, Canada, and New Zealand occupied places of honor. Their presence represented not just political alliance, but a recognition of the continuing relevance of the British monarchy in modern times. Among the guests, elderly veterans who had served the crown for decades sat with tears already forming in their eyes. For them, this coronation represented the continuation of traditions they had dedicated their lives to protecting. Many had served under previous monarchs and understood better than anyone the profound responsibility that was about to be placed upon William's shoulders. The flower arrangements, carefully selected and positioned throughout the abbey, filled the air with subtle fragrance. White roses, symbolizing new beginnings, were mixed with traditional British blooms, creating a visual representation of respect for the past while embracing the future. The floral designers had worked through the night to ensure every detail was perfect, understanding that their work would be remembered for generations to come. Television crews from around the world had positioned their cameras to capture every angle of the ceremony. The technical complexity of broadcasting this event to billions of viewers required months of preparation and coordination. Directors in control rooms monitored dozens of camera feeds, ready to capture the perfect moments that would define how history remembered this day. As the appointed time drew near, a hush fell over the assembled crowd outside the abbey. The sound of horses' hooves on cobblestone began to echo in the distance, signaling that the royal procession was approaching. Inside the abbey, guests straightened in their seats, cameras were raised, and hearts began beating faster in anticipation of the moment that would change everything. The great doors of Westminster Abbey, which had opened for countless royal ceremonies throughout British history, remained closed for these final moments before the entrance that would mark the beginning of a new chapter in the long story of the British monarchy. Everyone present understood that they were about to witness something truly extraordinary, a moment that would be remembered and discussed for decades to come. The massive oak doors of Westminster Abbey began to creak open, their ancient hinges echoing through the sacred space like a whisper from centuries past. The sound seemed to travel through every stone, every arch, every corner of the magnificent cathedral, carrying with it the weight of 1,000 years of royal tradition. Outside, the roar of the crowd grew louder, but inside the abbey, the silence was so profound that even the rustling of silk gowns seemed deafening. James Wellington, the master of ceremonies, stood at his position near the entrance, his ceremonial staff gleaming in the filtered sunlight. He had overseen royal events for 30 years, but nothing had prepared him for the intensity of this moment. His usually composed demeanor showed the slightest crack as he realized that in mere seconds, he would announce the arrival of the future king and queen. The weight of protocol and tradition pressed down on his shoulders like a physical force. The first glimpse of movement at the doorway sent a ripple of anticipation through the assembled guests. Heads turned almost imperceptibly, cameras adjusted their focus, and the collective breath of nearly 2,000 people seemed to pause in unison. The moment hung in the air like a perfectly balanced crystal, beautiful and fragile, waiting for the slightest touch to set everything in motion. Catherine's lady-in-waiting, Elizabeth Hartwell, had spent the morning ensuring every detail of the future queen's appearance was flawless. As she watched from her designated position, her heart swelled with pride and emotion. She had witnessed Catherine's transformation from a university student to a beloved member of the royal family, and seeing her about to enter Westminster Abbey as the future queen brought tears to her eyes that she struggled to contain. The royal guards, resplendent in their ceremonial uniforms, stood at perfect attention along the aisle. Each man had trained for months for this single day, understanding that their presence represented not just security, but the living embodiment of royal tradition. Their faces remained stoic, but beneath their composed exteriors, they felt the same electricity that filled every corner of the ancient abbey. Foreign ambassadors adjusted their positions slightly, each wanting the perfect view of the historic moment they were privileged to witness. The Chinese ambassador, making mental notes for his report back to Beijing, understood that he was watching the continuation of one of the world's oldest monarchies. Beside him, the ambassador from India reflected on the complex history between their nations and the significance of this peaceful, celebratory moment. The Abbey's choir, having rehearsed for months, waited with voices ready to fill the sacred space with music that would accompany this historic entrance. Their director, a woman who had devoted her life to sacred music, felt the familiar flutter of nerves that preceded any important performance. But this was more than a performance. This was her contribution to a moment that would echo through history. Young pages, carefully selected and trained for their roles, stood ready to assist with the ceremonial procession. Their faces showed a mixture of excitement and nervousness that only added to the human element of this grand occasion. For them, this day would become a story they would tell their grandchildren, a moment when they played a small but important part in royal history. The Archbishop's assistants made final adjustments to the ceremonial elements that would soon be needed for the coronation itself. Sacred oils that had blessed monarchs for generations waited in their ancient vessels. The coronation regalia, including crowns that had adorned the heads of kings and queens throughout British history, gleamed under the abbey's lighting, ready to play their part in the sacred ceremony. Television commentators around the world spoke in hushed, reverent tones to their audiences, trying to convey the magnitude of what was about to unfold. In living rooms, pubs, and public squares across the globe, people gathered around screens, understanding that they were about to witness a moment that connected them to centuries of royal tradition and ceremony. The sound of footsteps began to echo from beyond the open doors, measured and deliberate, each step bringing the future king and queen closer to their destiny. The rhythm seemed to match the collective heartbeat of everyone present, creating a sense of unity and shared anticipation that transcended all differences of nationality, class, or background. Lady Margaret Thornberry clutched her handkerchief tightly, remembering the many royal events she had attended over the decades. She had watched William grow from a shy young boy into the confident man who was about to accept the greatest responsibility his family could bestow. Her thoughts turned to the countless people throughout the Commonwealth and beyond who were also watching this moment, all connected by the shared experience of witnessing history unfold. The lighting in the abbey seemed to intensify, as if the ancient building itself was preparing to welcome its new monarchs. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight streaming through windows that had witnessed the coronations of generations of British royalty. The very air seemed charged with anticipation, every molecule vibrating with the energy of this extraordinary moment. Security personnel made final checks of their positions, their training and preparation evident in their calm professionalism. They understood that their vigilance was ensuring not just the safety of the royal couple, but the preservation of a ceremony that represented the continuity of British constitutional monarchy and democratic tradition. The first figure appeared in the doorway, and a collective gasp seemed to ripple through Westminster Abbey like a gentle wave across still water. There, silhouetted against the bright morning light streaming through the ancient entrance, stood Catherine, the future Queen of England. Her presence commanded immediate attention, not through any dramatic gesture, but through the quiet dignity and grace that had made her beloved by millions around the world. Her gown, a masterpiece of British craftsmanship, caught the light in ways that seemed almost magical. The intricate embroidery told stories of the United Kingdom's four nations, with delicate rose patterns representing England, thistles for Scotland, daffodils for Wales, and shamrocks for Northern Ireland. Every stitch had been placed with loving care by artisans who understood they were creating not just a dress, but a piece of history that would be studied and admired for centuries to come. Sarah Mitchell, the royal photographer, felt her breath catch in her throat as she raised her camera. Through her lens, she could see the emotion playing across Catherine's face, a mixture of solemnity, joy, and perhaps just a touch of the nervousness that any person would feel at such a moment. The soft smile that graced Catherine's lips spoke of her understanding of the weight of this occasion, but also of her readiness to embrace her destiny. Behind Catherine, the tall, familiar figure of Prince William came into view. His naval uniform was immaculate, every medal and decoration placed with precision that spoke of both military tradition and personal pride. But it was his expression that truly captured the attention of everyone present. Here was a man who had spent his entire life preparing for this moment, yet the reality of it still seemed to overwhelm him with its significance. The couple paused at the threshold for just a moment, a pause that lasted mere seconds but felt like an eternity to those watching. In that brief instant, William's hand found Catherine's, their fingers intertwining in a gesture so natural and human that it reminded everyone present that beneath all the ceremony and tradition were two people who loved each other and were about to embark on a journey that would define the rest of their lives. Lady Margaret Thornberry felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched the couple take their first steps into the abbey. She remembered William as a young boy, always thoughtful beyond his years, and seeing him now, ready to accept the crown, filled her with an emotion so profound it was almost impossible to bear. She thought of Diana, and how this moment would have filled her with such pride and joy. The royal musicians began their carefully rehearsed fanfare, the sound of trumpets and strings filling every corner of the ancient cathedral. The music seemed to lift the very stones of the abbey, carrying with it centuries of royal tradition and ceremony. Each note had been chosen for its ability to convey the majesty and solemnity of the occasion, while also celebrating the joy and hope that this coronation represented. As William and Catherine began their slow procession down the aisle, the assembled guests rose to their feet in a wave of respect and admiration that started from the front pews and spread throughout the entire abbey. The movement was spontaneous yet coordinated, as if choreographed by some invisible conductor who understood the rhythm of human emotion and royal protocol. The train of Catherine's gown flowed behind her like liquid silk, carried by pages who had rehearsed their roles countless times but still felt the weight of their responsibility. Each young face showed intense concentration, mixed with wonder at being part of such a historic moment. They understood that decades from now, they would be able to say they had played a role in this coronation, and their grandchildren would listen with wide eyes to their stories. Foreign dignitaries watched with fascination as the couple passed their pews. The President of France leaned slightly forward, recognizing the profound constitutional significance of what he was witnessing. This was not merely pageantry. This was the peaceful transfer of ultimate authority in one of the world's oldest democracies, conducted with a dignity and ceremony that had been refined over more than a millennium. Archbishop Justin Welby stood at the altar, his hands clasped in prayer as he watched the couple approach. He had known them both personally for years, had counseled them through various challenges, and now had the extraordinary privilege of placing the crown upon William's head. The weight of this responsibility was not lost on him, and he could feel the presence of all the archbishops who had performed this sacred duty throughout British history. The camera crews worked with silent efficiency, understanding that their role was to capture this moment for the billions of people around the world who could not be present. In control rooms, directors made split-second decisions about which angles would best convey the emotion and significance of each moment, knowing that their choices would determine how future generations remembered this day. Among the assembled guests, veterans of multiple royal events marveled at the unique energy filling the abbey. This felt different from previous coronations and royal weddings. There was a sense of renewal, of a monarchy adapting to modern times while maintaining its essential traditions. The couple's natural warmth and genuine connection to each other seemed to humanize the ancient ceremony in ways that made it more accessible and meaningful to contemporary observers. As they continued their procession, William and Catherine's eyes occasionally met those of friends and family members scattered throughout the congregation. Each exchange of glances told its own story: years of friendship, moments of support during difficult times, shared joys and sorrows that had led to this extraordinary day. These human connections, woven throughout the formal ceremony, reminded everyone present that monarchies, ultimately, are about people serving people. As William and Catherine reached the center of the abbey, something extraordinary began to happen. The formal, carefully controlled atmosphere that had maintained perfect protocol suddenly gave way to something far more profound and human. It started with a single person in the congregation, an elderly woman who had served in the royal household for decades, who began to quietly weep with joy. Her emotion was so genuine and pure that it seemed to unlock something in everyone around her. The ripple effect was almost visible as it spread through the ancient cathedral. Distinguished ambassadors found themselves unexpectedly moved by the sight of the young couple's obvious love for each other and their solemn acceptance of their destiny. Military officials, trained to maintain composure in any situation, felt their eyes misting as they watched William, whom many of them had known since childhood, prepare to accept the ultimate responsibility of leadership. Catherine's parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, sat in their designated seats with expressions that perfectly captured the surreal nature of their experience. Here they were, a middle-class family from Berkshire, watching their daughter about to become Queen of England. Michael's hand found Carol's, squeezing gently as they both struggled to process the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Their journey from running a small party supply business to sitting in Westminster Abbey for their daughter's coronation seemed like something from a fairy tale, yet here they were, living it. The younger members of the royal family watched with particular intensity, understanding that they were witnessing the moment that would define their own futures. Prince George, Catherine's eldest son, sat with the serious expression of a child who had been carefully prepared for this day, but was still processing its true meaning. His presence in the abbey represented not just family support, but the continuation of the royal line into yet another generation. Foreign journalists, many of whom had covered royal events for years, found themselves setting aside their professional objectivity as they watched the ceremony unfold. This was not just a news story. This was a moment of genuine historical significance, and even the most cynical observers found themselves caught up in the emotion and majesty of the occasion. Their reports would later struggle to capture in words what they had felt in that sacred space. The abbey's clergy, positioned throughout the cathedral, watched with deep spiritual satisfaction as the ancient religious ceremony unfolded in the same space where it had been performed for nearly 1,000 years. For them, this was not just a political or social event, but a sacred covenant being made before God and witnessed by the faithful. The continuity of faith and tradition represented by this moment filled them with profound reverence. As the couple approached the altar, the weight of history seemed to press down upon everyone present. This was the same space where Elizabeth II had been crowned, where countless monarchs before her had accepted the sacred duty of leadership. The stones beneath their feet had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the celebration of victories, and the mourning of defeats. Now they were adding another chapter to that long and complex story. The Commonwealth representatives watched with particular interest, understanding that this coronation would affect not just the United Kingdom, but dozens of nations around the world. The Canadian Governor-General reflected on the constitutional implications of this moment for for her own country. The Australian Prime Minister considered how this change in monarchy would be received by his constituents. For all of them, this was not just ceremony, but a moment that would influence international relations for decades to come. Members of the British public who had won their places in the Abbey through various lotteries and selections sat in stunned appreciation of their good fortune. Many of them were ordinary citizens, teachers, nurses, shopkeepers, factory workers, who had never imagined they would witness such an event firsthand. Their presence represented the democratic spirit that the modern monarchies strive to embody, and their obvious emotion added an authenticity to the proceedings that no amount of planning could have achieved. The moment reached its emotional peak when William and Catherine finally arrived at the altar and turned to face each other briefly before taking their designated positions. In that exchange of glances, everyone present could see the love, trust, and mutual support that would sustain them through the challenges ahead. It was an intensely private moment made public, and it reminded everyone watching that beneath all the pageantry were two real people about to undertake an extraordinary journey together. Television audiences around the world were experiencing the same emotional response as those present in the Abbey. In homes across Britain, families gathered around their televisions found themselves unexpectedly moved by the ceremony. Many reported later that they had not expected to be so affected by what they had assumed would be merely a formal occasion. The genuine emotion displayed by William and Catherine seemed to reach through the screen and touch hearts around the globe. The technical crew working to broadcast the event found themselves struggling to maintain their professional focus as the emotional intensity of the moment threatened to overwhelm their concentration. Camera operators with decades of experience discovered that keeping their shots steady required more effort than usual as they fought back their own emotional responses to what they were witnessing. Even the security personnel, trained to remain alert and focused on potential threats, found their attention occasionally drawn to the profound human drama unfolding before them. While they never compromised their vigilance, many later reported that this had been unlike any event they had ever protected, with an emotional intensity that seemed to transform the very air in the ancient cathedral. As William and Catherine took their final positions at the altar, the emotional crescendo that had been building throughout their procession reached its peak, and then transformed into something even more profound. A moment of perfect, sacred silence that seemed to encompass not just Westminster Abbey, but the entire world. In that silence, the weight of 1,000 years of monarchy, the hopes and dreams of millions of people, and the personal journey of two individuals who had found love and purpose converged into a single, transcendent moment. The Archbishop of Canterbury stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly through every corner of the ancient cathedral as he began the words that would formally begin the coronation ceremony. But even his carefully prepared remarks seemed secondary to the palpable sense of transformation that was occurring before everyone's eyes. This was no longer just a formal ceremony. It had become a deeply spiritual and emotional experience that would remain etched in the memory of everyone present for the rest of their lives. Sarah Mitchell, the royal photographer, found herself lowering her camera for a moment, recognizing that some experiences transcend documentation. Through her viewfinder, she had captured thousands of royal moments over the years, but this felt different, more intimate despite its public nature, more significant despite its adherence to ancient protocols. When she raised her camera again, her shots carried an emotional depth that surprised even her when she later reviewed them. In the pews, Lady Margaret Thornberry had stopped trying to control her tears. Around her, she could see that she was far from alone in her emotional response. Distinguished guests from around the world, people trained in diplomacy and accustomed to maintaining composure in any situation, were openly showing their feelings. The French ambassador dabbed his eyes with a handkerchief. The German chancellor smiled through tears of her own. The Canadian prime minister reached for his wife's hand, both of them clearly moved by what they were witnessing. The young pages who had carried Catherine's train stood at attention, their faces showing the same mixture of awe and responsibility that had characterized their entire involvement in the ceremony. Years later, they would realize that this moment had shaped their understanding of duty, service, and the power of tradition to connect people across time and culture. For now, they simply stood as still as statues, understanding instinctively that they were part of something much larger than themselves. The royal musicians continued their performance with a precision and emotion that elevated their music beyond mere accompaniment to something approaching the sacred. Every note seemed to carry the weight of the moment, and the conductor found himself fighting back tears as he guided his ensemble through the pieces they had rehearsed so many times but had never performed with such profound meaning. Members of the Commonwealth delegations watched with the complex emotions that come from witnessing the continuation of institutions that had shaped their nation's histories in both positive and challenging ways. For them, this coronation represented not just ceremony, but the evolution of relationships between nations that had been forged over centuries and continued to adapt to contemporary realities. The television cameras captured every angle of the ceremony, but even the most sophisticated technology seemed inadequate to convey the full emotional impact of what was occurring. Directors in control rooms around the world made decisions about which images to share with their audiences, understanding that their choices would influence how billions of people experienced this historic moment. Many later reported that their usual professional detachment had been impossible to maintain. Catherine's university friends, scattered throughout the congregation, marveled at the journey their former classmate had taken from student to future queen. They remembered late-night study sessions, casual dinners, and ordinary moments that now seemed to have been part of an extraordinary preparation for this day. Watching her stand at the altar with such grace and composure filled them with pride and a deep appreciation for the strength of character that had always defined her. The moment when William and Catherine exchanged glances just before the formal ceremony began captured everything that made this coronation unique. In their eyes, observers could see not just the love between two people, but their shared commitment to the responsibilities they were about to accept together. It was a look that spoke of partnership in its truest sense, and it reassured everyone watching that the monarchy was in capable and caring hands. Veterans in the congregation, many of whom had served the crown for decades, felt a profound sense of continuity and hope as they watched the ceremony unfold. For them, this was not just the coronation of a new king and queen, but the visible proof that the institutions they had dedicated their lives to protecting would continue to serve future generations with the same dignity and purpose that had characterized them throughout British history. As the formal coronation ceremony began in earnest, the emotional impact of William and Catherine's entrance continued to resonate throughout the abbey and around the world. What had started as a carefully choreographed processional had become something far more significant, a moment when tradition and modernity, formality and genuine emotion, personal love and public duty had combined to create an experience that transcended the boundaries between observer and participant. The ancient stones of Westminster Abbey seemed to pulse with the collective heartbeat of everyone present, as if the building itself had been waiting for this moment to reveal its full capacity for creating memories that would last forever. Years later, everyone who had been present would remember not just what they had seen, but how they had felt during those precious minutes when two people walked into history and emerged as the leaders of a nation and the Commonwealth, carrying with them the hopes, dreams, and emotions of millions of people around the world.